What is going on, people? Welcome back to another episode of the Uncensored Critic podcast. Thank you for joining me for one more special episode. I really, really appreciate all your support and your love so far. Thank you so much. And today it gives me great pleasure to be joined by one of the most prestigious directors, writers, producers, and actors that Hollywood has ever produced. And this man is responsible for films such as, I mean, if I was to go through his entire CV, I would be here for the majority of the episode, just listing off everything he's done. And so he's responsible for films such as Restless Natives, Soap Dish, Restoration with Robert Downey Jr., The Narrows, 12 and Holding, The Eagle, Promised Land with Kiefer Sutherland and Meg Ryan, Gambit with Colin Firth and Cameron Diaz, and a quite superb adaptation of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream with casts including Michelle Pfeiffer, Callista Flockhart, Anna Friel, Rupert Everett, Stanley Tucci, Christian Bale, and Dominic West. And just reading just those credits is just making me feel so overwhelmed. And just thank you so much, Mr. Michael Hoffman, for joining me today. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, very well. Thank you very much for that info. The only person you didn't mention in that Midsummer Night's Dream cast, who I think is absolutely brilliant, is Kevin Kline.
Of course.
Yeah.
And Kevin Kline as well.
Shout out for, because I've worked with him a few times and I'm getting ready to work with him again.
Fantastic. And he's a wonderful actor. What was it like working with all those guys on Midsummer Night's Dream?
Great. I mean, peculiar only in that I never had the entire cast together, even one day at one moment. Yeah, because so you had, the mechanicals were in first and then Bottom stayed and Michelle came and we did the stuff with Bottom and Titania, and then Rupert and Stanley came and who were playing Oberon and Puck respectively, and we did that stuff, and then the Lovers came in and then we finished with them. And so it was a very, it was just, but I'd been in the play 3 or 4 times. I directed the play on stage a couple of times. So I felt very confident about it and about the sort of style that I wanted to employ. And so I was able to, I guess, communicate that. I've done quite a bit of Shakespeare as an actor as well, so I feel comfortable directing actors with it. But that was a challenging part of the process. Absolutely. I don't think I've ever had that experience on a film, any other film, where I haven't been able to rehearse with the entire or the principal cast beforehand. And sometimes I rehearse quite a bit.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting because all the Lovers and everything in that play, when you're rehearsing for the theater, as you know, everyone's all together all the time, and it must
be
and
it's complicated stuff. I mean, a farce, people sometimes undervalue comedy and think of it as not as difficult or important somehow as drama, but in fact, I mean, on a technical level, it's much more complex and much more demanding. And that those scenes with the Lovers are particularly complicated just on the level of blocking and business and the way in which, and then of course wanting to make certain you're really preserving the people and their story and what matters, emotionally, because if that's not there, then the audience is not going to take any interest, no matter how many gags you manage to put together.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, one of the questions I have today, before we sort of kick off with like my main question, I think this is a good time to introduce this one, is to say, so, what was it like when you approached that project for the first time? Because, the challenge of taking Midsummer, yeah. So taking a theatrical piece and making it cinematic, what was that challenge like?
Well, I mean, I suppose one of the things was trying to figure out what kind of world to put it in, because there's so many, because, the play itself says it's set in Athens, but what does that mean? And because it isn't really something like you look at a play like Troilus and Cressida, which is set during the Trojan War, and then you really do feel, in fact, that there's some notion of a historical context, like you do in Macbeth or like you do in Hamlet, but Midsummer Night's Dream is so fantastical. And in fact, so many of the specific references are basic to Shakespeare's boyhood and to the woods around Stratford and fairy lore that he grew up with. So, it's one of the only 2 plots Shakespeare actually invented Everything else he adapted from something else. But so he's pulling a lot from kind of English folk tradition. So where you end up setting it. But I guess I thought, why, I thought, another one of the challenges of Midsummer Night's Dream on film that doesn't exist in theater is that film is much more sensitive to issues of point of view. And if you do Hamlet, that it's a play or a movie about Hamlet. If you do Macbeth, it's a play or a movie about Macbeth. Midsummer Night's Dream, it's easy to say what it's about, what the theme is in terms of I would say it's about love and transformation, but it's very difficult to say who it's about. So I had to make a choice in terms of, who was my protagonist. And so then I started thinking about, because I really love working with Kevin, and thought he would be brilliant to play Bottom, but it was a very different Bottom I'd had in mind than any I'd ever seen, who was more about, who was more had a kind of lovelorn aspect, who was a really unhappy man, not just an unconscious braggart, but a really unhappy man whose posturing was there to hide his loneliness. And so in fact, he was someone who was really in need of finding love. That provided a center for everything else to swirl around. So that was a really important step in translating it from the stage and productions I'd been in, productions I directed on stage, and the film was like figuring out who it was about. That was probably the most. And then, if you say, people in film writing classes are always saying, come up with your premise statement, and how do you state the premise of a film? Well, there's the who is about, it's what the situation is or the problem is, and what the world is that you're in. So if we're talking about Tootsie, then it's about Michael Dorsey, Dustin Hoffman, who's an out-of-work actor, and he's desperate to prove himself as an actor, and that's basically what his situation is, and that's what leads him to prove to other people that he can get a job. He dresses up as a woman and gets the job of Dorothy Michaels on the soap opera. But then the world is what? New York television, New York, the world of theater, New York, the world of television, New York, the world of actors in New York. Okay. So in this case, I was just thinking in terms of the world, it's hard for me to really remember how I got to Tuscany, except for it was a place I'd come to love and was very magical for me. And I'd spent a lot of time there and had grown up a lot there, and my imagination had grown up a lot there, and because I'd done a lot of writing when I was there. And I guess it was partly because of that. And then I started searching around, well, does it make sense? And what does it even mean? Fairyland in Tuscany. And then I came across this really strange book of folklore, which was so, as people have been to Tuscany, they know that before the Romans, even, there were people called the Etruscans who lived in that part of Italy. Okay. And but one of the beliefs was, in the Etruscans themselves believed that as people became less powerful and they were forgotten, they became smaller. And this became a part of Tuscan folklore, that the forest was full of what had once been this great people and these great gods who had been shrunk they'd gotten smaller through a lack of interest and attention, but they were still there and still alive and still animated nature. So I got really kind of intrigued by that. So I kept finding correspondences, right, that made it a good landscape to tell a story about love and transformation.
Fantastic. And I think the location really helped, especially those scenes in the woods. It really helped to, you felt, well, for most of us, I really felt the magic in the woods, like in those scenes, particularly between Puck and Oberon and.
Yeah. Stanley and Rupert are great. Stanley's a treasure. He's a wonderful actor. Yeah, absolutely.
He's a wonderful actor. Hopefully I get to work with him one day, but if you see him, give him my best.
Yeah.
And so I suppose, yeah, so I always love talking about the beginning of journeys as well. I will probably come back to Midsummer a little bit later in terms of with story structure and things like that. But for you on a personal level, where did the love of the arts, where did the love of directing start for you? Where did it come from?
I don't know. I mean, it started as a love of, I think it started as a love of story.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and the way I understood that initially was, I wanted to be an actor. But I do remember, for some reason, which I still don't understand, because I grew up in this tiny little town in the desert in Idaho, and in a house with not many books, except the Bible. It was my family was very religious, but I went to the library and I checked out this copy of Lamb's Tales from Shakespeare with this big picture of Richard Burton on the cover with the holding his crown above his head. And I'm not sure whether I was fascinated by the picture or what it was, or why I dragged Shakespeare home at 6 years old, but I was always intrigued by I don't know what it's interesting. A guy named James Hillman wrote a book called The Soul's Code, and he talks about the way in which that everyone is born with a kind of kernel of who they are, and teachers and parents, it's really their task to sort of encourage that kernel in that person to grow, and of course it's a responsibility of the individual as well to try to get in touch with that and foster that and find out who they are. So I think it was, in a way, I have to say, it was sort of in me. And then when at a certain point, though, I remember probably when I was about 18, being in a play and thinking, it was a comedy, and I remember thinking, you know what, I can sort of stand outside myself and see how I could make this scene work better. It was a strange experience of like being both, which is a place it's not a bad place to be as an actor, if you can be fully in and outside as well. I mean, everybody knows what that is, whether they're dancing or when you're in the zone or playing sports, there's this moment where you're hyper conscious and you're completely in the flow physically at the same time. It's a very, very good place to be, and we all get there seldom enough. But I think that in that case, I sort of went, oh wait, maybe I could direct, because I can see how to fix these things. I can see how to stage these things. And so I directed. But I was acting so much, and I really wanted to be an actor. I did end up directing a play when I was maybe 20, 21, because I was very interested in processional theater, and I was very interested in Grotowski, and so I started like playing with some of these ideas. But then when I won a Rhodes Scholarship and went to Oxford, and when I got there, I found it was more, although I did still act quite a bit, I found it more difficult to integrate myself into casts with, English accents and English plays. So I began directing more. And then I directed a production of Midsummer Night's Dream, actually, which was very successful and got attention inside and outside of Oxford. And someone came to me, was another student, and said, did I want to direct a film? And I said I had no interest in directing film. It would never occurred to me to direct a film. I loved the theater, and I loved academia, and I thought I'd go do my PhD in medieval drama. That was what I was in. I was working on a book about Shakespeare's late plays, and I was very kind of a nerd. But I said, because it looks so safe, so harmless, because all he wanted me to do was 20 minutes on video, when I thought, oh, that's, how big of that, maybe that's an interesting exercise. And the reason he wanted me was because I was very connected to all the actors at Oxford, and among them being Imogen Stubbs and James Wilby and Hugh Grant, and there was, and Mark Williams, and a lot of people have gone on to have careers. But anyway, he knew that I had access to the acting community. And then a strange thing happened. One of our professors a guy named Michael Howard, who was the Regis Professor of History at our college, Oriel, said, I do love drinking wine with young men. And we were sitting having a glass of wine with him in his rooms. And he said, I have a friend who's interested in film. And we said, who's that? And he said, John Schlesinger, who just recently won the Oscar for Midnight Cowboy, who actually we felt did in fact qualify for someone who was interested in film, having made Darling, Billy Liar, Sunday Bloody Sunday. Anyway, so he said, would you boys like to meet John? And we're like, oh yeah, sure, why not? So anyway, so we go to dinner with John, and he says, oh, what can I do for you, gents? And we said, well, Mr. Schlesinger, would you read our the short screenplay? He's like, oh, no. You want to make a film, you're going to need some things. You're going to need lights, you're going to need cameras, you're going to need editing facilities, you're going to need costumes, you're going to need film stock, you're going to need sound facilities, and I can give you all those things. Mm-hmm. And we're like, what? How? What? And he said, well, look, I have just made the biggest failure in the history of the British cinema, a movie called Honky Tonk Freeway, which John made after Midnight Cowboy and completely flopped. But he put a ton of money into the British film industry. And he said, everybody in town owes me favors. So all of a sudden, here, we're a bunch of idiots, and we have free run of Samuelson's for camera equipment, Lee's for lights, Angel's Costumier, Twickenham Studios to do all of our editing and post-production.
Wow.
And then, so we then go out and get a bunch of our kind of wealthy student friends drunk, and they pledge 17,000 pounds. So now we have 17,000 pounds. We have everything you need to make a film, except a screenplay, because the screenplay was so bad. So I went and locked myself away in my girlfriend at the time, who did the music for the film, her name's Rachel Portman. She's gone on to win 2 Oscars for composing, one for Emma and one for Cider House Rules. Yeah. Anyway, I went to her house and locked myself in and wrote this script. And then we cast it with some of the people I've mentioned, Imogen Stubbs, Hugh Grant, a wonderful actress named Diana Cadis, a wonderful actor named Rob Woolley, Mark Williams, James Wilby. Anyway, so we ended up making this movie, right? Mm-hmm. And then the BBC, when they saw the dailies, gave us some money to finish it, and then it got released all over the world, as a feature. So I accidentally became a film director through this experience. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, this movie really isn't very good, and talking to my editor, and he said, it doesn't matter, you're a film director now, you'll get offered another movie. And I said, no one who sees this movie would offer me another movie. He said, yeah, wait and see. And
they did.
Lo and behold, yeah. So I guess, it was just that, but it was an amazing project. And so many of the people, like the first time I ever saw a film camera was the first day of principal photography, which is crazy. Really? Yeah, really. That's really, I was, okay. Oh, so that's what it looks like. But the cinematographer became my great friend, and we made several movies together. He's shot, his name's Uli Steiger. He's made, I don't know how many movies with Roland Emmerich. He's a very big cinematographer. Rachel, who did the music, of course. Andy Patterson was the AD who produced Hillary and Jack. He's gone on to produce Hillary and Jackie, Girl with the Pearl Earring, Railway Man. His wife, who did the continuity, Olivia Hettried, wrote Girl with the Pearl Earring. She's just written a movie called Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, which is going to be, I think, really huge this year. But it was just like this whole bunch of people has gone on. I mean, we're going to have a 40 because it's 40 years since we made it this year. So we're going to do a screening at Oxford and invite everybody up and have a bit of a reunion bash.
It sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, that'll be good. Yeah.
It feels like there's like a pattern emerging of like divine intervention, like you just picking up that book of Shakespeare at 6, and then you sort of falling into film directing and like discovering what a camera.
Yeah, it's some. I mean, I think I understood that I wanted to be a storyteller. I think I understood that.
Yeah.
You know, I think that and because I never really questioned my life as an actor, and I don't think I would have questioned it as a writer. I did question it as a director, partly because I had a hard time early on squaring my lack of experience and my perceived lack of ability with the fact that it was me that everyone was looking to make all the decisions. I couldn't quite see why does my vision matter, you know? And I didn't have it in me at that point to go, okay, I see clearly that I'm the channel of this version of the story. And that's okay, because and as long as I'm really trying to put my ego second, put it in second place to my intuitive perception of the demands of the story and what it's about, then I could get square with it. But I did almost quit after I made, I guess, 4 movies. And I had a couple of incredible breaks. Obviously, this thing at Oxford and with John Schlesinger was really helpful in that situation. But then even more to the point, I wrote another script. I sort of thought I shouldn't be writing about, the English middle classes from Idaho. So I wrote a script called Promised Land about my something that happened in my hometown. And Robert Redford got it, and he really liked it. And he wanted to take it to the Sundance Institute as one of the projects. And then he just sort of adopted it and adopted me, and he produced two of the, I made one movie in between, which is this movie, Restless Natives, which is super fun and a movie I really love, which came out of was Sundance related, but came out of a completely different channel, which I can tell you about, which was fun. But then I made Promised Land and Some Girls with Redford's company, Wildwood. But at the end of that, I thought, I'm not sure that this is how I want to spend my life. And I think it comes partly from my background in this, growing up in this evangelical church, thinking, although I'm certainly not that anymore and had questioned that from a relatively early age, it's still the part of it that made sense to me was that we need to be of service in our lives, that we need to do things for other people, and we need to try to make change for the better if we can. And I wasn't convinced at that point that storytelling, well, not storytelling, but me being a film director was doing that. And so I wrote to Redford and I said, I'm really grateful for everything you've done for me, but I really think I've applied to the Peace Corps, and I want to go spend a couple of years in Africa, and I don't think I'm going to stick with this. And he was super cool, and he wrote back, and because he knew I was going on a road trip. I was going to do an acting job in Florida, and I was going to drive from Idaho across the country, and happened to be passing through Sundance. So he said, well, why don't you stop by on your way through and let's have dinner and let's talk about this. So we sat down and talked about it, and got to the end. He didn't really judge anything, but at the end, he goes, where are you going next? And I said, I'm going to go to Santa Fe. And he just took this little key out of his pocket and he goes, well, I have a house in Santa Fe. Why don't you go stay there? Stay there for 3 or 4 days, and I guarantee you something will happen that will change your life.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, well, I don't
Cool.
know what that means, but I'm happy. Want to stay in Santa Fe. So I was traveling with this woman that our relationship was kind of near the end, and we kind of knew it was the last time we were going to spend together for a while. But anyway, we were traveling across the country, get to Santa Fe, lovely little house. And I'm having these fantasies that I'm going to, go to some Anasazi ruin and run into the ghost of a medicine man, or I'm going to be able to read the pictographs or petroglyphs in the rocks there, that something is going to appear to me like Joseph Smith in the golden tablets or something. And nothing like that happened. But the last night I was there, Katerina and I were having got into a fight, and I didn't want to go to bed, and she did. And so I stayed up, and I there was this one room in this little house that I'd never gone into because it was I thought it was a closet actually, but I opened the door and it was a very small room. I mean, tiny, like maybe 3 meters by 3 meters is if that's, and all that was there was a 13-inch television and 6 videotapes, which are these interviews between Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell called The Power of Myth. And so I stuck one in and I started watching, and he said certain things in those interviews that really made me rethink myself. And one of them was, through all cultures, through all times, man has had 4 ways of getting to God: singing, dancing, storytelling, and silence. And when I heard that, I went, I'm a storyteller. That's what I am. I didn't understand myself in that way. And somehow by understanding myself as a storyteller, it completely reanimated my desire to work in this field. And I never really questioned it again. I just canceled my application to the Peace Corps and made another movie.
Again, it sounds like divine intervention. It's like,
yeah, I know. I mean, I don't know what it's a divine intervention. I mean, I think that we all have, there is I really believe in intuition. I really believe in this kind of inner voice experience. I've had it happen too much, not too, and when my head gets out of the way and I actually respond to this impulse that comes from my body in a different way, I'm even if it feels like what it's being whispered to me to do, even if it feels wrong, it's always right. It's just amazing how sometimes it's really counter to what you'd think was the safest, smartest, best bet, but it's been right again and again and again. So I've gotten better about getting out of my head and listening to my body. I'm an intellectual by nature. I mean, I'm when I say an intellectual, I don't mean like hyper intelligent. I mean, like I just operate from my head. So that's been kind of one of my, everybody has their own struggles in this business, and we all sabotage ourselves in certain ways. And for me, over intellectualizing was one of those ways. And giving into my fear was probably the biggest one.
Me too.
It took me even longer to overcome. And we all run up against anxieties about or insufficiencies in certain ways, but I've certainly gotten much, much better about trusting myself in whatever situation and believing, on an artist. I don't mean like alligator wrestling or, going, having a one-on-one with a anaconda or something. I mean, like there are certain things that, I just think are smart not to do. But in terms of those kind of fears and tensions that get in the way of us all as creators, I've gotten much better at being able to, walk right into them and realize that they're phantoms, they're very little substance to any of the stuff we're afraid of.
Absolutely. Well, I think I speak on behalf of a lot of people. Thank you for following your intuition and for being a storyteller.
Yeah, well, it's a incredible blessing in terms of a way to live a life. If you can live your life as a creative person, I don't think there's anything better, because you're insured of an extraordinary level of richness.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm going to put that better myself. So it brings on to the first sort of technical question for today. I know you write, and you've made films which you've worked with a writer which you haven't written, and things like that. So I was curious to know how long does it take to create a vision for a film, like so, and what you want to do with it. It's like, how long do you sort of take to sort of find the vision of the film that you've written or anyone else has done, and then you decide that's what you want to do with it?
I don't know. I think it's like a dialogue, right? It's a dialectical process. It never really stops. I mean, you have an idea, and then that's either an alternative to that idea pops up in your own head or comes from someone else, and then you synthesize those ideas, and then you move on to a new version that becomes the kinds of, the synthesis that becomes the new thesis, and then you continue to work in that dialectical way, with all the input you're getting from those around you. I don't know. I mean, I suppose one thing that is true is that if you can get very connected to what you're making a film about, and you have that touchstone, that really guides you in terms of, I mean, it's like I'm doing this workshop at the National Film and Television School on Thursday, and the number of 6 people have written these 10-page scripts, and they just want me to go out there with a cinematographer and talk about, how to break down a scene, and just the process of reading, rehearsing, blocking, shooting, which is, can be very straightforward and can be a matter of just illustrating dialogue, but you hope not, right? Because you want to find a shot that expresses the scene, so that the shot is actually complementing what you're telling a story about, that there is, and I believe generally there is a right shot although at the same time, I'll say I don't believe in rightness or being right. I think there is, or rather, I mean, yeah, put it that way, it's possible to find a shot that absolutely expresses what the scene is about. That doesn't mean you won't need some coverage, doesn't mean you may want to be in a close-up at another point, or there may also be a shot that expresses something very specific in a moment within that scene that you want to make sure you can also deal with at the same time. But I think too many times people just go in and think about shooting master close-up, and they're just really, like I said, they're just really illustrating dialogue. And I would like to, use this opportunity to, because to me, everything is about that. Like, I'm constantly trying to think, how do I use the design? How do I use the cinematography? How do I use the music? How do I use to complement this overall, notion of it's not just the story you want to tell, but the way you want to tell the story, right?
Yeah, that's great. And I think so the way you want to tell the story, you gave us a talk last week here at GSA about how to write or get the structure of it. And I was wondering if you could just touch on that explanation just one more time for the sake of today, in terms of like how, because you set it out, you showed us your your sketchbook, and it's full of like these like half rectangles, and like, so okay, so this bit happens now, and then it could, the story could continue like this, with this particular way. I think use Romeo and Juliet as the example.
Yeah.
So Romeo could continue being in love with Rosaline, but oh no, Juliet turns up. And then what happens? Oh no, then there's like another diversion, which is like Mercutio turns up and gets stabbed or gets killed, and then next thing. So would you mind just explaining how you sort of sit down?
Well, it's not really me. I mean, I'd love to take credit for that, but it goes back to it's Aristotle basically, who says, in his Poetics says, every story has a, drama. One of the things you can say about drama is it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when you hear that, you think, well, that's fairly obvious, but he means something a little bit more complex than that, which is that, generally speaking, in traditional Western storytelling, in dramatic storytelling, you have a 3-act structure. And you also have within those 3 acts also kinds of points of action, I'll call them, or plot points that tend to occur at certain points in the story. So, so generally speaking, if you watch a movie, you probably find that around between 8 to 10 minutes in, something that will happen that will turn the story will actually create, well, what it really does is, generally speaking, and this is all general, right? There are exceptions and there are different ways to use these things and invert them and play with them and whatever, but I'm just talking about basic thread structure. There's something called the initiating action, which is, generally speaking, and this is true on stage as well, you know, a routine is established, which is what we probably call the setup of the world, and then that routine is broken, right? So the setup in Romeo and Juliet, you've got you know, the Capulets and the Montagues at each other's throats. You've got Romeo not very interested in the conflict because he's really a lover and he's really in love with a girl, as you said, named Rosalind. And then you go along for a chunk of the first act, and they find out about a ball that's going to happen at the Capulet at the Capulet Palace, and so all of a sudden Romeo has, you know, he's contemplating walking into the house of his enemy. Okay, so but he's still anything, and the reason he's going is because he believes Rosalind is going to be there. So then, you know, we move along through the first act, and yes, there is like a line going off into, if you can just imagine a line going off into space that might go on forever, which is the Capulets and the Montagues continue fighting. Romeo finally gets together with Rosalind, or maybe he doesn't, and she isn't interested in him, he gets him together with someone else, whatever. But that just is a line that goes off into space. But the thing that keeps it from going off to space at the end of Act 1 is the fact that he meets Juliet at the Capulet ball, palm to palm, this holy palmer's kiss, and that turns the story. So now it's going to be a story about Romeo and Juliet, the daughter of the Capulets, the son of the Montagues, these two families that hate each other, their children are in love. That complicates the setup, but it also produces, you know, an action. So all of a sudden it's about Romeo trying to get Juliet to love him, Juliet trying to make sure it's for real and get Romeo to marry her. And that happens, so you've got this first act, which is generally, you know, a matter of exposition and setting up the story. You've got a second act then is about growing complication, you know, because now, okay, so now they're married. So now Romeo tries to make friends with Juliet's cousin Tybalt, who has a sworn a sworn enemy of the Montagues. And so that leads to more conflict, which brings his friend into it, Romeo's friend Mercutio into it, who ends up getting killed in a duel with Tybalt. And then Romeo in his fury kills Tybalt. And so things complicate. So now Romeo is the murderer of his wife's beloved cousin. So how did that happen, right? So this is just, and now Romeo's banished, so they can't be together. So now you can imagine another line going off into space, which was a line where Romeo has been banished to Mantua, and he just, you know, lives forever in Mantua, maybe marries a Mantovani girl, and he has some kids, and, you know, maybe someday the prince relents and says you can come back, or who knows what. But anyway, meanwhile, Juliet, who was meant to get married at the beginning of the movie, will be marrying Count Paris. She becomes a countess. Has children. She sends them out to a nurse, like her life becomes their life and whatever. But it doesn't happen because Friar Lawrence, thinking, I really think this is an opportunity to bring these two families together and solve this internecine rivalry, says to Juliet, I have a potion that can put you to sleep for 42 hours, and you'll sleep, and they'll think you're dead, and they'll put you in the family vault, and then I'll get word to Romeo and he'll come rescue you. Okay, so now when Juliet drinks that potion, that turns the story. She's not going to get married the next day anymore. Romeo's going to get this message, so he's going to come back. So then the story's gotten quite narrow as it moves toward its resolution, where it can only go in very, very few places. I mean, when you're in Act 1, the story could be any number of things. You know, the story could basically be, strangely enough, could be Midsummer Night's Dream. It's not that different. Romeo could meet Juliet and they could just run off together into the woods, because that's like the situation with Demetrius and Helena in Midsummer Night's Dream. And that's the interest, sorry, it isn't Demetrius, it's Lysander and Hermia who are running. But anyway, the point remains the same. And that's one of the things that's so interesting about Shakespeare is you can look at it is a system. I mean, you can look at one play against another play and you can see again and again, oh, that's so interesting, because Jaques is a form that the sort of malcontent or the melancholy Jaques is a form of Shylock, who's also the person who resides outside the dance, is a form of Malvolio, who's another person who resides outside the dance. He continually plays with the same archetypes, and mixes them, shuffles and mixes them up together and throws them out on the board and see what he comes up with this time.
Like a massive cauldron of just bubbling characters just going.
Yeah. But they're also types that reoccur again and again and again. It's quite interesting.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you so much for explaining that. I think I'm curious.
The person who explains it really well. Just to plug one of the people who was really formative for me in my reading of dramatic literature is a man named Northrop Frye, who wrote a wonderful book called The Anatomy of Criticism. And then he wrote 2 books on Shakespeare, one on the tragedies called Fools of Time, and one on the comedies called A Natural Perspective. And they really, really are wonderful books.
Yeah, Anatomy of Criticism. Yeah, and you love Declan Donnellan's book as well, The Actor and the Target.
Yeah, I do. I think it's very good. Yeah, I love it. It's particularly for the statement he makes where he says, the question is never who's the most talented. The question is who's the most open. Because I'm a real believer that as soon as we start worrying about, am I talented? I mean, that is a fruitless road to go down. Just be open.
Yeah.
Listen to the voice inside yourself and be grateful for your opportunity to create with other people.
Yeah, that's a big thing I want to talk to you about today, about the actors process and auditioning and stuff like that. But just before we get onto that, Paul Simon said this in an interview, that when he writes a song, he writes it music first and then the lyrics come later. But he said once the sound is correct in his imagination, then the story can begin. I know that's a musical perspective, but so when you've written your script and you've got the film and you've edited it and it's all ready to go, how do you know, when does your imagination or your intuition say, okay, it's ready, I've got everything I need at this point?
I don't know. I don't know, because I do. I mean, I think even now, when I think back to some movies, I think, I wish I hadn't cut that scene. I wish I'd kept that moment. I mean, one of the things you have to be careful about as a director in the preview process is that there's so much pressure. You're getting these, the test audience is watching it, they're filling out cards and they're telling you what you think. And inevitably, I've never made a movie and I've never heard of a test screening where the test audience didn't say, it's too slow at the beginning. I mean, it's partly because the nature of a test audience is they're not watching a movie the way that, I don't know if you've ever been part of one of those test screening audiences, but you don't watch a movie in a natural way, right? You're going to have to fill out a test at the end. So you're leaning forward, your antenna are up, you're looking for things that are problems. So it's not basically how you generally go into the cinema. But I think what it does do is that because you're so attentive, it makes time goes more slowly. I mean, I have this theory about that time, our perception of time is related to how many objects we notice in any given space. Think about it this way. So you're walking somewhere, I don't know, you're walking from where you are now to the train station in Guildford. Now, the first time you ever do it, the walk feels quite long, right? And I think part of the reason is because you're looking all the time at everything to see where you are, to remember where you are. Is this the right way? Should I have turned right? Should I have turned left? By the 50th time you've walked it, it may not even feel, I mean, you may like get there before you even realize you left, right?
Yeah.
But this is because then you're able to go into a kind of alpha state because you're not examining the world. And so time changes, the nature of time changes completely. So, but I think that the same thing happens in with the test audience, that they're looking for every signpost. And so it feels longer, but whether it does or it doesn't, it's something that I've fallen victim to, where I'm being told the movie's too long in the beginning, so I'll tend to trim things. And then much later, I'll look back and go, you know what? That even if that, even let's say it was a little long at the beginning, what that gave to the piece in terms of richness or resonance, or I mean, one of my, this is just a kind of fun example, but so there's in Soapdish, there's a mention between when Robert Downey goes to Florida and recruits Kevin Kline to come back on the soap opera. He says, we can do Hamlet, we can do other things, right? And so there was a mention at one point of a one-man Hamlet, and I actually shot the rehearsal of the one-man Hamlet between Downey and Kevin, and it was so funny.
Wow.
And I didn't put it in the movie, and so it's basically lost forever. And it's such a drag because it's a very funny, could have made a whole movie about the one-man Hamlet.
Is there no like file like on your desktop, like it's just saved there, or is it literally been deleted?
No, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's probably in a vault somewhere at Paramount, but I don't know. I mean, I guess I could try to access it, but I wouldn't even know where to start. But it's really a drag because it was especially with those two actors. I mean, it would be a great thing just to have on the internet. I'm sure it would get on YouTube. I'm sure it would be very popular.
I want to see this.
Yeah.
It sounds so cool. So let's sort of come on to the acting sort of perspective. And you gave a fantastic workshop you did it down in the Bel Airs Theatre down here in Guildford, and you got some students from GSA up on stage and auditioned them in 3 different ways. The first one was all about someone who'd learnt the piece. The second one,
I think that the distinction was, there was one person was simply there and it was a cold reading, so they were seeing the text for the first time. Another one was someone who had read the entire play but was just reading a short piece, and another one who had been given the sides, and they've had the sides to study, didn't know what the whole play was, but it was a much longer piece with more places to go. I think those were the 3 versions.
And it was really interesting to see you sort of give all this advice and stuff like that. And one thing you said to me on that day, which I found very helpful, was if you're on audition, and you mentioned it earlier, don't worry about focusing on if you're talented or not, just being open is the key. And I think you said, like a successful audition is when I can see an actor just wanting to make that connection and being open and being like, this is what I'm trying to say to you, this is what I'm trying to do to you.
I mean, I think it's partly about, or to a great extent about, trusting yourself and owning the fact that you have something meaningful to give, so that you're walking in there not as a potential victim, not as a beggar, but as a fellow storyteller. Look, we're all a tribe of storytellers, and we're at different points in our journey, but you have every right to be in that room and to present what you think is a useful, way to approach this character. And I think it's also good to be front-footed, lean into it and go, okay, this is what I think it is, but I'm really open and excited to hear what you think it is. But can I just show you what I think it is? And then I really hope you'll tell me how you respond to what I'm doing, and then tell me what else you'd like to see me try. So, you go in with, just, I think maybe to talk about saying, to be confident isn't the point. It's just simply respect the fact that you have trained yourself in this craft and you have chosen to an approach to this character with whatever information you have, and be, kind to yourself and supportive of yourself as you walk in that room and give that gift to the person sitting there. You're not there to please them. You're simply there to say, this is what I believe, this is from what I know, this is what I believe this person is, and what I believe this moment is, and what I believe this person wants, and what I believe is in the way of this person. Yeah. And so it's just about, I think it's hard though. It's hard to, because it's always set up as a hierarchical situation, or it often is. And I think it's very important that you take responsibility for the fact that you have every right to look that fellow creative person right in the eye and say, this is what I have to give you.
Yeah. And you have like a story about an audition you had where you auditioned someone who really, really blew you away, and that one that really, really stuck out in your mind?
Oh, I'm sure I do. Yeah, well, yeah, a lot, actually, but an actress who actually auditioned for Promised Land, and I didn't cast her, and then I cast her in like 3 other movies afterwards because I remembered her, and she made such an impression.
Yeah.
She wasn't, she might have been right for Promised Land as well, if I think about it, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that she came in and she was so truthful and but also so specific, and her take on the material was, there was a vulnerability about her that was, and that operated in tandem with the sense of humor that I just was like, this person has got layers and layers and layers going on. So I think that was part of it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, sorry. Can you say who it was?
Oh, her name's Sheila Kelly. Yeah.
Oh, Sheila Kelly. Nice. I'm gonna look out for
yeah. But yeah, she's great.
Yeah, fantastic.
And terribly adventurous. She was also terribly adventurous creatively. Like, if I gave her a note or gave her an idea, she was able to take it and spin it into something that gave me exactly what I asked for, but gave me more as well. And so, but some of these things, it's very hard to say, how do you get someone to do that? Part of it is, that was, I remember the first time I auditioned Downey. I think we ended up spending 5 hours together. It wasn't on Restoration, it was on another movie that we never made. It wasn't on Soap Dish either, it was before Soap Dish. But we got to know each other through that process where it just became a session that was about playing and improvising and playing and improvising and playing and improvising, then going out and drinking. And it was just some kind of, I knew I was in the presence of a really kind of unformed in some ways, but absolutely bottomless well of spontaneous creativity. He's amazing, Downey. Amazing.
Yeah, he's remarkable. And just quickly, what's he like as a person outside of work?
Kind of like what he's like. He's kind of like Puck. If he hadn't been having, trouble with in his personal life at the point I made Midsummer Night's Dream, I definitely would have cast him as Puck. He is Puck. He's a trickster as an archetype. He's, he loves to play. Yeah. And one of the only things that ever frustrates me about, and it's not really a frustration, but it's just like, he never does the same thing twice, ever, even if you need him to. So like you do 7 takes and something Restoration, he'd always do something else. He'd always improv something else. So just on a basic editing level, sometimes you're like, I need this moment because I'm going to cut. Sorry, I don't know. There's a dog outside. I don't know if that's going on. So I need this cutting point. And it was just like, he's just a bundle of ideas and possibilities, it never really stops. So
Yeah.
sometimes that could be a little bit tricky, but he's a delight. And we've stayed friends over all these years and through all the ups and downs and, in his life and mine. And yeah, he's in a very good place now. I mean, I hope he, what's that?
He's Iron Man now.
He's the biggest, most highly paid actor in the world. He's as big as it gets, but I hope, and I would say this to him, so say it on the podcast. I really want him to come back and, make another little movie, make another, I mean, he came close to doing my Gore Vidal movie. We had lot of, we spent 5 or 6 days together talking about it. Even did makeup tests, a lot of stuff, but then in the end, he just didn't feel he could do it. And I think he was, I think he quite enjoys, he did a lot of smaller indie films when he was younger. And I think between Iron Man and Sherlock Holmes and other big things he's done, he's come to really like doing, being a big entertainer, which is great. And so that's where he is right now. But one of these days I'll coax him back with something.
Yeah, well, that makes two of us. Downey, if you're listening, mate, we want you back. We want you back in this. Cool. So just one just last sort of audition question in a way, because one of the things in that workshop was one of them was doing a cold reading, and so if you are in an audition, someone comes in and they're doing a lot of like this. They're looking down, they're looking out, they're looking down, they're looking up, and then, not the best sight reading in the world. Would that sort of affect their cast?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends on how good they were when they were looking up, I guess. But I think that the key thing there is to again, it's about owning the space. It's about owning the experience. You come in there, don't allow yourself to feel rushed. Mm-hmm. Take as much time as you need to look at whatever, and then come up off the page and connect. Don't feel the rush. It's better to play like these 3 linked beats that you can kind of look at and carry in one, and then have to take a little moment to reorient yourself than it is. But you can also, even cold reading, you're going to still have the page out in the room for 40 minutes or whatever, 30 minutes. So there's a lot of work you can do in 30 minutes if you get yourself in the right headspace. If you've got to get into a situation where this isn't easy, that you're not distracted by the other people around you, that you're not looking going, oh, that's that guy who always gets the parts I want, who's sitting in that chair, or that's the person I was at drama school with. Take that 30 minutes, go out of the room, go down the staircase and get centered and make a decision about a big, clear choice you can make about who this character is. Because making a strong, clear choice gives you a better chance than anything else of making an impression, of being remembered.
Oh, fantastic. Just moving on to the sort of editing process of films exactly, because I suppose when you shoot a film, you've got so many different options like all at once. And how do you go about sort of narrowing it down and saying, okay, that's the shot I want for there, that's the shot I want for there? Because you've got...
I kind of know, I mean, like, well, in some movies, I've storyboarded the entire thing. So I literally have the whole thing worked out in advance, which I don't recommend, certainly not for me at this point. I don't want to do that anymore, because if you're not careful, you end up shooting the storyboard as opposed to seeing what's in front of you, which I'm much more interested in at this point, just seeing what gifts the universe has given me at any given moment. But then, and it is true also that the cut footage reveals its own truth. it does, and it requires different things. But in terms of like moments of performance, I generally know when I've shot it, okay, that's it. That's that moment. We can move on. And I'm usually, when I go back to the editing, most of those moments of performance are the ones that get into the film. But I think it's a lot more about, the thing that's always amazed me is how certain moments in the script, you felt like that's going to be so moving, that's going to be so important. And there'll be another moment that you almost didn't care about or know. I mean, you certainly didn't see it as the essential building block that it becomes, but all of a sudden, because the film, it behaves differently than you imagine it to some extent. So that's kind of remarkable. And so you need to just stay really alive to what the images are telling you. And also something you find really often is that there's whole bunches of stuff that needed to be in the script to be clear for the reader that aren't important once you're in the film at all, because they're communicated, and you've got so many channels of sensory communication going on in a movie that there's so many ways to communicate information that all of a sudden, certain things you think were critical, like I think I mentioned it the other day, there's a big scene in the middle of the Gower movie, which we just got to it. In fact, not only was it not necessary, it was actually an impediment, because it told the audience too much information too early.
Yeah. Is it okay to ask you about your film Gower, about it, or is it
about? Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, sure. Dear Mr. Vidal, it's called. Yeah.
And so do you think we'll get? I mean, obviously, it's a tricky thing to sort of release it, because I know it starred a certain Kevin Spacey, and do you think there'll be a resolution to it? Do you think?
I hope so. I mean, that's all I can say. I mean, I don't. All I can say is, working with Kevin, what I saw on our set was, he was very professional. He was very good to work with. That's not to say anything about, I mean, I don't pretend to know the ins and outs of his life or his past. All I know is that working with him was a positive, experience just on that level. He does a very good job in it. But I more to the point, I think that the story itself being about, what parts of ourselves we're willing to give up or compromise to get what we want, is very relevant and interesting theme to explore, especially in the world of Me Too. And so that's that I think the movie has, really does have something to say. So I hope it has a legitimate place in the current dialogue. So I really hope, for that reason, that people are someday able to see it. But I can't spend a lot of time worrying about that. I mean, it was, yes, 3 years of my life, and it's a big frustration. But on the other hand, I've had, if I want to worry about that as a piece of bad luck or whatever, or bad fortune, I then have to kind of go, I mean, I just have to sort of acknowledge the amount of good fortune and good luck I've had, so you've got to take one with the other, and I, so I move on, and have been very productive since then in terms of what I've written, and written a musical, written a play, written 3 more screenplays, written 2 television pilots, and sold one of the series. So and I think just sold another script idea at Cannes. So I'm not sitting on my hands.
No, you're on fire.
I don't know if I'm on fire. I'd like to get something done. Although this TV show called American Classic that I'm doing with Kevin, I think, is probably going to go the end of this year. It's been frustrating, but it's been frustrating for everyone. COVID was a super weird time,
Yeah, very, very odd, very odd. But I think better times are ahead now, which is good.
Yep.
Yeah, so I just have a few more questions. Just how many more have I got left? Just 2 or 3 more questions for you today before we just sort of wrap up.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, actually, no, just one extra. When's the musical out, by the way?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's hopefully we'll do it at the festival at Edinburgh next year. That's the plan. We've done one workshop up in Scotland already. It's a musical of Restless Natives, of the film I made, Restless Natives, that we developed with the National Theatre of Scotland. I think it will be the festival's absolutely the right place to launch it. But I want to do another workshop before we do. And given how the festival works anymore, I mean, the lead time you need, already you should know what you're doing for 2023. So, and we're getting ourselves together and trying to figure out what kind of venue, whether we want to be in an existing venue or we want to create a venue. So it's all, but it's in quite good shape. I mean, the score exists, the book exists. We had a fantastic workshop with wonderful Scottish actors. And so, like I said, but again, the thing about musicals, that's really, I think the musical theater audience is ruthless. They're kind of like, feed me. You can't entertain them enough. It's like stand-up comedy. And so I'm very aware that it needs to be in front of people, and we need to learn more about audience response as we work on it. But it's fun, really fun. I mean, I had to, I knew nothing. I knew so little about musical theater. And so to really educate myself about it and see every musical in the West End and think about how they work and what makes one work better than another one, and just this ruthless nature of like the story needing to move forward, and how do you create songs that move the narrative, and it's really been fun.
Yeah. Is the music continuous, or do you have breaks?
No, there are breaks. Yeah, it's very it's quite traditional as it's works off the model of traditional Hollywood musicals, but what's interesting is trying to marry Big Country and the Big Country sound, because Big Country originally did the soundtrack, and finding, taking that Celtic rock language and marrying it to musical comedy language. That's a big challenge. That's really been interesting and intriguing to work on.
It sounds exciting. I look forward to
that. It's fun. Yeah, some of the music I'm really loving.
Yeah, I look forward to the West End transfer next year.
Yeah, well, yeah, you and me too.
Just nip back to the editing room just for 1 second. I just thought about this question. Have you ever had, I know you just said that when you edit, you usually know what shot you want to use, etc. But have you ever had a moment?
Sometimes.
Yeah, have you ever had a moment in the editing room where you have seen a scene shot from a different angle and it wasn't what you anticipated, and you just thought,
oh God, constantly? Are you kidding? No, I mean, all the time. Like, yeah. I mean, there was a whole sequence in Last Station, which was a big important sequence, and it just wasn't working. We were being, I found out later, but that we were just being too literal about what we were telling. It was partly because it was a lot of business with a lot of principles involved in a sequence where, I mean, it's a sequence where the Helen Mirren character, Sophia Tolstoy, throws herself in this pond pretending to want to commit suicide, or maybe wanting to commit suicide, and people then jumping in after her, rescuing her, and anyway. So, but somehow, as I'd conceived it, and I'd conceived it carefully, and in that case, I'd storyboarded, because when you're dealing with all these principles in the water, and it's all these questions about how much of the scene can you do and keep everybody dry, and then once we commit to somebody being wet, how do we get through it as quickly as possible? It was in the middle of April in Germany. It was cold, and we had bathtubs in tents everywhere for people to sit in hot water, but they, once they were wet, Yes. So anyway, when it was laid out, the sequence just felt very by the numbers. It felt like, and no matter what we did, I mean, to massage it didn't seem to be doing it. And so at a certain point, the editor said, we both sort of said, let's just throw this up and just start over. And by making it impressionistic and making a bunch of time jumps and losing a bunch of shots, all of a sudden it began to become a piece of cinema. And I think the sequence works great, but it looks nothing like what I storyboarded. I mean, so that was certainly, a complete rethink, and that happens a lot. I mean, you rethink a lot in the editing room.
Yeah, it's almost like
well, they say, right, a movie's written 3 times: once at the screenplay stage, once when you shoot it, and once when you cut it.
Yeah.
And it's true. You really do. It becomes, everything else is kind of left behind at the point you get in the editing room.
It's just almost like a checklist of like everything that happens in a scene, like, or in a shot, so that, okay, that you can sort of tick that box and say that is helpful for the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, what you find with the cinemas that the film communicates, like I said earlier, in so many more subtle ways than you necessarily expected, or certainly than you could have counted on when you're scripting. So, and sometimes, by not telling things, by creating gaps, you create information. There's always there's also, the whole business of the energy that comes from the cut itself, and what because that's a dialectical relationship between any 2 images that produces meaning just by putting, I mean, the famous thing was it wasn't Eisenstein, it was another early Russian filmmaker, Durga Vertsov, I think his name is, but I'm sure I've said the name wrong, but so you'll all have to forgive me. But anyway, I know you probably know about this experiment, but he just literally takes a face, a kind of uninflected image of a face, and then he puts of a woman, and he puts next to it a crying baby, and he asks people, what's the woman feeling? Then he puts next to it a man with a gun. What's the woman feeling? The image of the woman never changes, but the meaning happens in the space between the 2 images. And that's, so that kind of stuff you can't, in certain cases you might be able to imagine it, but generally speaking, in writing a screenplay, the task of the screenplay in terms of convincing people to finance the movie and actors to get on board with the movie is just it's just doing a different job than the film does.
Fantastic. I just have two more questions for you today. Actually, I'm just hearing about like financing the film and stuff like that. Could you tell me about the journey of actually getting a script and actually making a film? So you've got a script, and then you present it to the studio, and then what happens?
Well, it depends. I mean, I've made like 16 movies, and every one of them would be a different story, about if I were to tell that story. I mean, but I suppose there's different, in broad strokes, there's very different paths.
The
easiest path at the moment is if you sell your package to a streamer. That's the easiest. Like Gower was, I mean, it's sad because it's had a troubled life, but the making of it was easy because Netflix said yes. They gave us all the money we needed to make the movie. They didn't nickel and dime us. They didn't question the budget. And we were responsible about what we asked for. And then they never came on set. Matt Brodley came and visited, but it was super pleasant. And they never questioned it. They never questioned it in the editing. And, they let us get on with it. So that is a kind of dream scenario that almost never happens. Then I've made studio movies, which are either I would have taken a project to the studio, like Midsummer Night's Dream, took to Fox, or they brought me a project like One Fine Day or Soap Dish. Again, in very different states of development. Soap Dish was a page 1 rewrite, just was a do-over. And so it was a lot about, the early stages were a lot about script work and whether, at that point, the studio was developing lots and lots of movies. You didn't know what they ever were actually going to make.
Yeah.
or even how sincere they were about the project, because it wasn't costing them that much at that point. And then, and then once you get the script, you start going through the casting process. If you finding that the cast is kind of coming on board and it's really working, then it's, and the budgeting is going on at the same time. The budgeting is constantly shifting and changing depending on what cast members are coming on board. And then you get to a point where they green light the movie and give you a start date. And then at that point, then it becomes very like the other. At the point you have a green light and you have the budget and the cast, things get similar, right? Because then you're doing pre-production, you're shooting the movie, you're editing the movie. Depending on the size of the budget and the expectation of the financier, that editing process can be more or less complicated with more or less input and more or less collaboration / interference. But then there's, like a purely independent movie, like Last Station was, which is like, in that case, I would write the script and I would get the cast on board without any kind of commitment from any financier. I would ask for what are called letters of intent. I'm saying, all things being equal, I want to do this movie. So with Last Station, I wrote it and I originally sent it to Meryl Streep and Anthony Hopkins, and they both said yes. So then I had those two people. Then I got Paul Giamatti and Laura Linney involved. And so I had this package. And I was going out and I wasn't able to get it financed at that point, because at that point it was Meryl before Devil Wears Prada, which, I mean, she was like a goddess as an actor, but not necessarily, didn't mean box office. It was before Mamma Mia. So, and that was curiously in that process. So you're trying to get it. So you get that together and then you go shopping to independent sources of finance, trying to ask them for, trying to get them to, and trying to find a foreign sales agent. Anyway, what happened in that movie was I got introduced to a German director named Jens Muir and an English director who were working together and thought they could access a significant chunk of German money because there was a lot of interest in German-Russian co-production at that point. So and if I shot it, and also if I'd shoot it in Germany. So I wanted to shoot it in Russia, but it came to make a lot more sense to shoot it in Germany. So I went down that road, and then we got that, and those processes, unlike the studio who can say, okay, it's greenlit, I'm writing a check. Those processes in the indie world often are long application procedures. So at one point, when Meryl had time and Tony had time, they couldn't get the money together. So I lost that date. So then I was constantly trying to get another date with Meryl. Meantime, Devil Wears Prada happened. Meantime, Mamma Mia happened. It's because this was it was like 5 years, this process. And all of a sudden, Meryl was one of the biggest female box office stars in the world. So I couldn't get a date. It wasn't that she wanted more money. It just couldn't get a date. And finally, I said to her, look, I've heard through the grapevine that Helen Mirren's people might be interested. I think I'm going to have to try to get this done. And she was like really gracious about it. And she always was. And she was always a big fan of the movie. But anyway, so I went to Helen. Helen committed. Tony then got cold feet for whatever reason. But in the meantime, James McAvoy had a hit with Last King of Scotland, and I'd seen it and I thought, that's the guy to play Bulgakov. So I got James's phone number through a friend, called James, sent him the script. He said yes. So then I had James at Helen. So the guy who played Tolstoy became less important. And so I could offer to Christopher Plummer, who was perfect, but not as big a star as he became after doing Last Station, getting an Oscar nomination and then winning the Oscar with Beginners. So all of a sudden I had a package that could work. And we could, push it over the line. But it was, it's that kind of financing and that kind of exercise, the indie route is complicated and super time consuming.
Yeah.
But you have more, but I had Final Cut, yeah. So that's worth something. So that movie is exactly, even though the producers disagreed with me at a certain point quite vociferously, I was able to make the movie I wanted to make and got Oscar nominations and won all kinds of awards. And so there. Wow. So there, producers.
God, I'm in awe of that story. Thank you for that.
Yeah, well, it was not always fun to live through, I'll tell you that much.
I think Ryan Reynolds talks about that, when he made Deadpool, he said it was like the best and worst relationship he was ever in. And, because that was a long process for him as well. But yeah, so I just love the fact you got James McAvoy's phone number, just went, hey, I want you in my film.
well, I didn't do it that way. I mean, the truth is, I was truly blown away by his performance in Last King of Scotland. I was just like, I didn't, I'd never seen him before, and I was just bowled over by it. And so, I mean, it was more like, please be in my film, please. So, I was just, but he really, really loved the script. So that was good. Yeah.
Wow. He's an incredible actor as well.
Isn't he?
Yeah.
He's one of the best I've ever worked with. He's a brilliant listener. Listening is so crucial.
Yeah.
Craft of acting. And I've never worked with anyone who listens with as much vitality and clarity as he does. I mean, he listens, he hears something, it passes through his body, and you see, it's like clouds going over the moon. You see this thing across his face, which is just truth. He's just unbelievable. He's an open actor.
Massive shout out to James McAvoy on here. Yeah, I was lucky enough to see him in Cyrano de Bergerac in town.
He's very good.
Magnificent performance. Wow, I'm so bowled over by everything we've talked about today, Michael. Thank you so much for everything.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Yeah, I just finished on one final question with my guest, and that is, in your extraordinary career, feel free to use more than one example, but has there ever been a time or a series of times which you've gone through which you'll never ever forget?
Oh my God. I mean, lots. I mean, there's so many, because in almost every movie, there's some scene or some moment, even in movies where I can see a lot of things I'd like to do differently. There are moments and that just absolutely were exactly what I wanted them to be or dreamed they would be, or better, probably better. Yeah. But I do remember one crazy thing we were out shooting in the desert on Promised Land in west of Salt Lake, really in the middle of nowhere. It was so cold. I mean, we had 2 grips go down with frostbite. I mean, it was like minus 23 degrees, and we were shooting. And there's this really long scene that I wanted to shoot in one, with this long track that was laid out in the sagebrush. It was like, had to be, I think it was elevated or something to be able to keep it fluid and smooth enough. And it was a fight that became a kind of reconciliation between Meg Ryan and Kiefer Sutherland. They get out of the car, and she runs into the desert, out into the desert, and he runs after her and he catches her. And so it's this long track with them, and then it becomes a 360 around them when they're embraced. And we had one chance at it. I mean, it was one, we had one, and it was the kind of thing that you would generally rehearse again and again and again. But the one chance was because the sun was going down. And Uli, the cinematographer, said that was going to be it. And so I was like, okay, guys, I mean,
no pressure.
This is what you're clear about where you are, right? And what the scene has to do. And who you are with each other. And they did really trust each other. I'd done a very smart thing if I do say so, in the rehearsal process, because a lot of their story is about a road trip that they take between Reno, Nevada, and Boise, Idaho, and driving across the desert. And so I had rehearsed with them in Reno and then given them keys to a pickup and said, I want you just to drive the path they take and make me a movie of your journey. And they came out of that experience so bonded, the two of them. And but anyway, so we went call to action, and this thing just unfolded. It was absolute all I could hope for, with this, and of course the fact that it was magic hour and the sun was gone and you had this weird pink light in the sky just made it,
wow,
something. So I remember that. I remember that. I remember, but I could probably find something in every film that was like that,
Yeah, but again, divine intervention.
Yeah, I guess, but but all of a sudden everybody kicking in the same direction, everybody, that's a lot of it. Everybody being committed to the story, being committed to the journey of those characters and how we believed it was an important thing to tell. I think that's, and everybody just committing to that and being open to what happened in the moment,
As they say, teamwork makes the dream work.
There you go. Yeah, that's right.
Wow, I'm just so bowled over. Michael, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your
Not at all.
And I really don't know what to say. I'm just so bowled over by it. Just thank you so much. I don't know what to say, but yeah, guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This has been the Uncensored Critic podcast. If you just hang on after I end the recording, Mike, I'll say goodbye to you one to one. And
okay.
I'm speechless. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.